wanted to start with why you're running for re-election.
Well, Skylar, thank you very much for having me on. Look, the top priority here is taking care of Iowans. We have been the top 10 most bipartisan legislator in Congress. We have taken a playbook from Iowa, which I think is really helpful. Things like passing a bill for rural Iowans to get affordable housing, making sure that we're leading on Family and Medical Leave Act that we were able to pass, and increasing troop pay. One of the things is a combat veteran who serving for more than 20 years now, making sure our frontline military forces receive the pay that they've earned, are all reasons that we've been able to pass legislation in Washington, and we hope to continue to do more, just taking Iowa common sense out to the nation's capital.
And why do you feel Iowans should be voting for you over your Democratic opponent?
We've worked really hard, not only to work across the aisle, but to deliver meaningful results for folks. And we have done this on the economy, we have done this on energy independence, and we're doing it on things that we think are really important, like securing the border. Now, the reality is, I think my opponent in this case has just not been clear, and in some cases straight up lied to Iowans repeatedly. We saw this during the debates, we've seen it during the fact check. Multiple times he refuses to state his position or any accomplishments he has. And candidly, he's been a 20-year Democratic operative who lost Hillary Clinton's campaign, who lost the Joe Biden campaign, and is now trying to run on politics. We're trying to run not just on principles alone, but also on people and what we've done for this community for the last 10 years in our public service, as well as our several decades of military service. Those are results that people can look to and say, this is a record of accomplishment, and we've always tried to be transparent with folks on that.
And so I wanted to start out with the Farm Bill. It's a major issue for a lot of Iowans. The House Ag Committee, which you're a part of, did approve a bipartisan bill. It didn't get voted on yet, and the Senate hasn't done anything yet. If you are reelected, how important is it for you to make sure that a new Farm Bill gets passed? And what specific policy do you feel Iowa farmers need?
I think this is top of mind for everybody. Look, everybody in Iowa is a rural community, and frankly, food security is national security. It impacts every single American. It's one of the reasons that we push so hard. We only vote on this bill once every 5 years to get across the finish line. And I'm glad we were able to get it out of the Ag Committee with 17 of our priorities in here. Look, we got more of our ag priorities into the Farm Bill than any other freshman, any other member of Congress. That's saying something alone. Now, the challenge is, obviously, we need the Senate to come to the table and actually put their ideas down. They've refused to have even a debate on this, and I think that that is dangerous. So while we've passed it in the House, we still need the Senate to sign on to it. I feel confident we can get this done. But here are some of the priorities I've heard from the hundreds of farmers who I've talked to and the 87,000 farm families who've endorsed me on this issue. First and foremost, taking care of crop insurance to help family farmers. Second, making sure we've got the next generation of farmers available, so young and beginning tax credits for farmers as well as veterans. Other areas that are hard infrastructure investment, things like expanding broadband, one of the bills that I included that were able to be passed into this. And then an area that's really important to me that we included was something called Goldie's Act, making sure that we end this abomination of puppy mills that have taken root in Iowa and forcing the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which has failed repeatedly to work with our local law enforcement, to make sure that we shut these things down. Look, we wouldn't treat our livestock this way. There's no reason we'd treat our four-legged friends that are in our homes this way.
For sure. Another part of the Farm Bill are, SNAP benefits, the food assistance programs. Iowa food banks have seen an increased need over the last 2 years at least.
Absolutely.
And there has been some criticism about the SNAP changes that were in that Farm Bill. How would you address some of those concerns?
Yeah, so right now the Farm Bill is comprised of almost 80% going to SNAP. As Republicans and Democrats working together, we invested $1.5 trillion, the largest increase to SNAP in modern history. I think this is really important. Unfortunately, we've got some folks, particularly on the Democratic side, who want the entire Farm Bill to be all about SNAP. And you can't have food on a plate or food for the country if you don't put some actual farm in the Farm Bill. And I think this is a very important aspect of this, that 80% going to SNAP is a lot. What we don't want to see is it going to 90, 95% and forcing farmers basically out of business. Because all that's going to do is it's going to drive larger farms to take over, or worse, for us to become a food importer versus than a food sustainer, which what we are currently available to do.
Kind of on the same lines of that, how do you address food security here in Iowa?
I think there's a couple of ways. One, we need to make sure that we have more farmers coming to this. Right now, the average age for farmers is over 65, and the majority are moving towards that 70-year-old range. Nowhere else in the country do we expect 70-year-olds to be the men and women who are taking the bulk of feeding this country or leading in any industry. Being able to have on-ramps for a family farm like ours. Look, we're a 6th-generation family farm. Who's going to be that next person to hop in the combine to help round up cattle, who's doing chores in the morning? We've got a real pathway here in Iowa to make sure that we're leading so that small farms can still be successful into the future. The other thing I would say here is that we've got a lot of great innovation coming out of it. I was the former director of cybersecurity on the National Security Council. The future of technology isn't just in industry, it's right here in the ag tech world, and we should be embracing that. It's one of the reasons I made sure that states like Iowa were first in the area to increase artificial intelligence, how we're incorporating new technologies, and what we're doing in cybersecurity. It was one of the main efforts that I put in the Farm Bill to make a land-grant institution like Iowa State become really a model for a hub-and-spoke ability to bring the best technology, train our new farmers and agrarians and ranchers, and then get that technology out into our farm fields and onto our ranches. It'll be a game changer for how we're able to feed not just America, but help be a source of stability for the entire world with our ag export capability.
For sure. Another thing, that's top of mind for a lot of voters is the southern border.
Yeah.
You've talked about the need for the border to be more secure while also, maybe improving some legal immigration systems. Could you just talk a little bit about how you would like to see that addressed?
Absolutely. This is the top issue that we came into in Congress. In my first days alone, we passed the most comprehensive border security in America's history, H.R. 2. It passed, but it was never taken up by Democrats in the Senate, and that's unfortunate because over the course of the last 3 years, we've seen nearly 10 million illegals be incentivized to enter into our country. They brought with them enough fentanyl to kill 150 Americans every single day. They bring in a tragic line of human trafficking, and they've allowed, Chinese-made fentanyl to come in through cartels that really take root in our communities. And I don't think there's anybody out there right now who hasn't experienced the corrosive and tragically death-resulting impacts of fentanyl in the community. Now, we've done some things that I think are really important here. One, we've worked to secure the border with legislation. We have funded Customs and Border Patrol. But, I've been a military guy who has served overseas to defend our country and then been called up as a guardsman to help defend our country at home. It should never have to be like that. On Biden's first days in office, he eliminated 90-plus executive orders that President Trump put in place that had helped to secure our border. The challenge here is I've got an opponent who can't even call on the president to do 3 things that would help today: remain in Mexico, end catch and release that has allowed violent criminals to come into our country, and tragically, we've had far too many deaths as a result of that, and finish building a real border security wall and the technology that's necessary for that. Now, he'll talk about something that might have happened in the Senate, but the reality is there was never a bill that came out of the Senate. So after 3 years of failed policy, you can't just jump on the bandwagon and say, I also support law enforcement when you spent a career trying to defund the police. The other aspect I will offer on this is it's very important that we're talking about a legal immigration process that works. Because after the fall of Afghanistan, when Biden abandoned Americans and our Afghan allies, I've helped get some of the Americans and Afghan interpreters and special forces guys out of that country. The largest airlift out of Afghanistan happened from a group that we led called Task Force Argo. I think this is really important because now they're here, they're U.S. citizens, and they're some of the best people that you're ever going to meet. They wanted to come to this country the right way. They served in combat with us. They were our allies. We've now put those folks at the end of the line behind 10 million folks who've come here illegally. How unfair is it to them? How unfair is it to the other Americans who want to live, work, and operate here and invite them when we allow people to come here the wrong way who can't work, who overwhelm schools, who cause delays in healthcare access, and who effectively have put those same veterans out of housing, all to the tune of creating effectively 12 more congressional seats in the next race. I have to think that some Democrats have really decided to make it politics over people, and that's become dangerous.
And so, when you're talking about the legal immigration system, I guess what specifically would you like to see changed on it? I know there's some criticism
Yeah.
on how long it takes for somebody to, gain legal status and things like that.
Well, first, we have ports of entry for a reason. If you're coming here and you're seeking amnesty, you've got to go through a process, and you should be doing that in your country of origin, not being funneled by cartels or Chinese mafia to the southern border and shoved over the border in the hopes that you're going to get an asylum claim. That's the wrong way to do it. But this administration has incentivized that. They've told people, come here the wrong way, and then be trapped in the United States with no options out. The second aspect we can do is really move more of our federal system, particularly our judges, to adjudicate these processes much faster. Right now, if you want to come here the right way, we're talking almost a decade before you can even be heard. That's not only unacceptable, it's dangerous for those individuals. The other side of this is the folks who have come here and now are staying. Over 1.5 million have already had their due process day in court and found they can't stay in the country. But we have a federal government who's not moving them out. And that makes it harder for the legal immigration process to take root because we've effectively used all the resources to help house, assist, and transfer folks who came here illegally.
Sure, and I know you did mention the bill that was in the Senate that didn't make its way to the House regarding the southern border. I was curious, though, with you working across the aisle, being one of the top 10, I was curious where you kind of stood on the bill and if it was something, because I know in the House, the Speaker of the House had said it was dead on arrival. Yeah.
Let me highlight this. Look, first of all, I think my opponent, Nunn, has lied about this bill repeatedly, and it's clear that he doesn't understand the bill. Let's be very specific about what's in the bill that I would have supported. Supporting Customs and Border Patrol, one that we already had in H.R. 2. It would reinstate the things that we've supported, like ending catch and release, something the president could do today. If my opponent agrees with this, then call on the president to do that. It helps for legal immigration, but what the bill did that I think is very bad is it said 5,000 people get amnesty every single day in America. You just had to be the first 5,000 people to show up, and you got admission to the country. Look, that is not the right way to do it. It's disenfranchising people who are trying to come here for real amnesty claims while prioritizing whoever can make it to the border. And largely, these are folks who have had to pay into the cartel to get here in the first place, and as a result, they're going to be dependent on the cartel going forward. Let's help people in their country of origin find a good pathway to the United States so they can have an American dream that they've earned and deserve, not incentivize people to come here the wrong way. And I would call out my opponent on this. You're doing it, you're harming people. You're bringing in folks who are going to be basically slave labor to the cartel, and you're not helping those folks in the long run get here on an amnesty claim where they don't have the ability to work, to integrate with our community, and to be able to be a real partner in this process.
So how is this an issue then, I guess, where you can work across the aisle?
Yeah.
Obviously right now, things could change come November, but we have a Republican House and a Democratic Senate.
I think we've got a really good playbook that we put out in H.R. 2. It talks about, first and foremost, let's secure the border. Let's protect our country. We've got more than 10 million folks who came here illegally. It's not helpful to them. It's not helpful to the communities that have to absorb them, including right here in Iowa, where we've got 55,000 illegal immigrants who are now in our community that have exhausted the resources for those who want to come here the right way. We're now paying for college for an illegal, and an American citizen can't even get that level of assistance. That's unfair. The other aspect of this, I would say, is at the federal level, we can do a much better job in passing things like the SAVE Act, one that we passed on a bipartisan basis in the House to say, this election cycle, if you want to vote, you have to be a U.S. citizen. This isn't rocket science. This is exactly what America should be expecting from our electorate. But we have a Senate Democrat and my opponent, a Democrat, who refuse to be able to support these common sense solutions. So here's my commitment going forward. In the same way that we've been able to get so many good pieces of bipartisan legislation passed, we're working with military folks who have a background serving this in a real way, both on the Republican and the Democratic side. And we've been able to lead a key aspect of immigration reform as well as border security. Those are two good pieces of legislation that I feel very strongly in a future Congress. Not only do we pass, but we can encourage the president to do this. And I think the last point here is really important. Look, all the great laws in the Congress don't matter if you've got a president who won't enforce the law. Say what you want about President Trump, he enforced border security and he turned the tide. Say what you want about President Biden, he didn't enforce border security. We have 10 million more people, and he has a Department of Justice today who is suing the state of Iowa when Iowa catches somebody who's been deported, comes back into the country illegally, commits a felony, and we're not even allowed to hold that individual for future deportation. If the Department of Justice spent more time working with us to secure our border than it did suing states like Iowa who are doing this the right way, I think we'd be in a very different situation right now.
And now kind of taking a look at inflation, obviously that's another top issue, kitchen table issue for a lot of voters. How does this get addressed? I know it's a complex issue.
It is. Here's what we know. For the last 3 years, under the Biden-Bacall style of government knows better how to spend your tax dollars than you do, we've seen a $26,000 increase for every family. That's money right out of your pocket. On top of that, we have seen a DC does more with your money than you're able to by creating vast inflation. It's more expensive to buy eggs in the morning. It's more expensive to ship things with the supply chain. Let's take an example from Iowa. I'm very proud in the state legislature. We provided the 3 largest tax cuts in Iowa history. And as a result, driving down costs meant Iowans got to spend more of their money in their local community. Keeping that extra couple of dollars means investing in a family farm, spending it on Main Street, making sure that your kids are taken care of or the water heater is replaced when it needs to. These are things that actually drive an economy. It paid off Iowa's debt, and now we have a $1 billion rainy day surplus in case there's emergencies. Right now, the federal government can barely fund itself when we have a hurricane, let alone when we have a $35 trillion debt. Republicans and Democrats are responsible for the cost, but I think it's time for a new generation to stand up and say, let's provide some real solutions. The very first bill I presented in Congress was a balanced budget amendment. Because if you and I have to balance our credit card at the end of the month, then Congress should have the same fortitude to be able to say, we've got to balance our budget every single year and make sure we're not putting this on the credit card for future generations.
Kind of going to the next thing, I know you've answered this a bunch in recent interviews, but obviously the abortion issue is a big one in the race, and there is the ad that Bacall has put up where you're in the debate raising your hand, supporting no exceptions for an abortion ban, but then you have come out and said you do accept exceptions. So can you kind of just explain what was going on there?
Yeah, well, let's say, first of all, out-of-state spending has put millions of dollars into clipping a 3-second portion of a debate. They've lied to us. And as Iowans, I find that very frustrating, and they shouldn't scare women or families with false information. So I want to start by just saying I want to be clear and transparent on my position. I'm pro-life, but I've also voted for and have always supported exceptions for health of the mother, rape, and incest. I've also been a strong proponent in legislation to make sure that we've got availability of over-the-counter birth control for women in our community. And I've been a strong leader in bipartisan acts to make sure that we have access for IVF, because starting a family can cost a family tens of thousands of dollars, and we don't want any family to have that barrier. I also believe that the federal government should not be out putting a nationwide abortion ban in place. That's not the role of Congress, and it's certainly not something that I would support. But I also want to call truth to the fact that Nunn has never once stated his position on abortion, and that's the true extremism here. 70% of Iowans disagree with late-term abortions. He fully embraces it. The majority of Iowans don't believe that taxpayer funds should be spent on abortions. He absolutely wants to codify that and institutionalize it. And Dobbs' case has given it back to the states. He would take that choice and that vote away from Iowa women and take it to Washington, D.C. And we all know that Washington, trying to take Iowa's voice away, becomes a dangerous place for everyone involved. So I would call him out for being not transparent in his own position and lying about ours. And I want to be truthful and candid with every viewer out there.
And then I was just hoping you could clarify at the very beginning, you did say that they're lying by that 3-second. Could you just, explain how they're lying?
Yeah, absolutely. So as soon as, if you watch the next 2 seconds of that clip, I'd call out the moderator there and say, hey, let's have a conversation about this. My views versus our legislation are something that's very important for Iowans. So by highlighting that in that follow-on clip, I said, I voted for exceptions for rape, incest, and health of the mother. And I think that's a very important aspect. Women should get to have a voice in this. I don't think anybody in Iowa wants to see somebody put in that impossible position. But I also followed up with that clip and highlight the fact that what is truly extreme are late-term abortions that are taxpayer funded. No other country in the world other than maybe North Korea and China are doing this, and this has now become Nunn-Bacall's new policy. Let's do the most extreme abortion policy in the world. I don't think anybody in Iowa wants that.
And so another issue, kind of along the same lines of that we're seeing here in Iowa, is maternal health care deficits, especially here in rural Iowa. With other states that have abortion bans, we are seeing that healthcare providers are starting to leave. So I was curious, how do you address that issue with now Iowa having an abortion ban?
Yeah, so I've been out talking with a number of my doctors, my county hospitals, my rural providers on things that they need most. And what I have heard overwhelmingly is we need more access to nurses and frontline healthcare technicians. And that's everything from a county hospital to an OBGYN to working in a residential care facility or a neonatal unit. It's one of the reasons I'm so proud to have led bipartisan legislation called Train More Nurses Act, so that we can get the 100,000 young people that want to become nurses into that pipeline. Right now, the choke point is we don't have enough instructors available. And so we've made major investments, particularly at our community colleges with skills training. This is an area where I think we could do a lot. One, to incentivize people who want to go into healthcare, like my mother and my mother-in-law and all of my aunts and uncles had the opportunity to do this. The other challenge is that we want to make sure we are able to retain them when they follow this path. And so one of the things we're trying to do is make sure we follow the Iowa model of if we have an OBGYN or we have a critical care physician, that we can help pay off their college loans if they stay and work in a rural community or even an underserved urban community to really help those people at the point and place where they need it. And I'll follow up with, I think, something that we're very proud to lead, broadband. Increasing broadband access means care for patients at their time and place of need, so they're not driving hours for a medical appointment when it's something that they can talk to their healthcare provider directly over their home, internet, and be able to get the assistance they deserve at that time.
And then I wanted to take a look at Social Security as well. It's an issue that, people have been saying it's not going to be able to be funded long term. And we talked about the millions of ads that we've seen out this election cycle. One of the ads from Democrats has said that you have voted against Social Security and Medicare 25 times and that you want to raise the retirement age. Yeah. Do you want to raise that retirement age? And can you explain your position on Social Security?
No, and let's just be very clear on this. This is another multi-million-dollar campaign by somebody who is lying directly to Iowans. It's scary, it's false, it's wrong. And I've called my opponent out several times. Iowans don't like political operatives. He spent his career as a political operative. This is exactly why people find him slimy this way. So let's be very clear. And you can check it out at LenonLies.com. I have supported and voted multiple times to ensure that Social Security and Medicare are fully funded. And here's why it's so important. Iowans have invested their life savings, their hard work to be able to make sure that these programs are available for them. They've earned it. We need to make sure that we follow through on it. It's the same commitment I would do as a military guy to my veterans. Making sure that Social Security and Medicare are 100% funded is a top priority list for me. The issues that they brought up on this are, things that they are trying to, confuse and lie about the issue. Let's be very clear on what I voted on. Everything that I voted on has been to help grow Social Security and fasten it. I think that there are areas where we could do good cleanup. There are certain states that have fraud, waste, and abuse. We need to make sure that that's corrected so that we don't bleed out the system. We also need to grow our economy so these things are committed. What the other side has done, and Lennon's been questioned on this, he has no plan to fix the death spiral that Social Security could find itself in the future years if Democrats continue to tax us and drive up a debt that is going to cost everyone, both our seniors and our newest taxpayers, much more money in the future. So I think there's a good solution for this. Let's make sure that we fully fund Social Security and Medicare, and let's grow our economy so we not only pay off our debt, but can fund these really important programs that Americans are going to need in their future.
And then I spoke with Representative Feenstra as well this election cycle, and he had mentioned that there was something being worked on in the House where anyone who's been in Social Security, who's been paying in their whole life, everything will stay the same. Yeah. But, for the next generation, maybe those just entering the workforce, potentially changing that a little bit and raising the retirement age. Is that something that you've been working at all on with him?
So this is the Ways and Means Committee. I think we need to look and see what that proposal looks like. I think right now, first we need to make sure that we have a solvent Social Security and Medicare program long into the future, because the majority of folks coming up on retirement are certainly going to choose that as an option. For future generations, that's one of the things that I think innovation should come into the conversation, where they can do it and where we're best going to use taxpayer dollars. And that should be something that we're consistently reviewing.
Sure. Another issue, obviously, we just hit the 1-year anniversary of the Israel-Hamas invasion, the war that's going on down there. Could you talk a little bit about what still needs to be done and, Congress's, the U.S.'s position over there?
Yeah. First and foremost, the Americans who are hostage by Hamas need to be released. And that has to be the scene setter for any future conversation. Now, I've long believed, as a military guy, I've commanded forces in operations in both Afghanistan and Iraq, that the United States' best strength is actually strength through deterrence, not by putting boots on the ground. Sadly, we have given up that strength through deterrence. The failed withdrawal in Afghanistan that left our allies on the ground, the inability to stand up to Moscow, the kowtowing to Beijing, and now we have literally North Korean troops operating in Europe without the United States able to deter that at all. Israel has stood up and fought on the front line against the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, all funded by Iran. This administration has allowed $100 billion to flow from Iran directly to these rebels, or to these terrorist groups, because they don't enforce the sanctions that were placed on them at the beginning. The result is we have a less stable world. And Israel is on the front line of not only fighting back against these terrorist groups, they're doing a lot of the fighting so that the United States doesn't have to. They not only deserve our support, but they're doing it the right way. The challenge is, if Israel doesn't do this today, those same terrorist groups are going to find their way into the U.S. And tragically, because of our open, failed border policy, we have hundreds who have already entered into the country, who have made assassination attempts against President Trump, who have hunted down U.S. officials and tried to execute them. What's to say, that those same threats don't end up on our doorstep? So fighting the head of the beast now in the front lines of Israel, I think, is really important to America's national security domestically.
And with that, there are some who, have been criticized. I can't speak.
No, you
have criticized, what's happening to the innocent Palestinians.
Yeah.
I guess, do you feel there's anything that needs to be addressed there?
Who's the biggest hostage in this situation right now? It's the Palestinian people. The reality is that Hamas has used them as human shields as they reached into Israel, stole Americans, Israelis, Christians, Muslims, Jews, and used them as fodder in a war that they wanted to inflict on Israel. Iran and the terrorist groups have blatantly said Israel needs to be wiped off the face of the earth. These are not rational actors. These are actors committed to terrorism through any means. And if it means punishing the Palestinian people who are trapped in the middle, they're fully willing to commit to that. I think in any situation where we're helping Israel defend itself, we need to recognize that rooting out this cancer that is terrorism, particularly in Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, starts with going after Iran itself. So far, Iran has remained unscathed. But here's what I've done. I have led sanctions regimes to hold Iran personally accountable for this. One, so that they can't have the illicit oil sales to places like China, which is allowing China to buy cheap oil and allowing Iran to get great money, but to cut off their funding source. That's the best way not only to stop the terrorists, but also to protect the people who are trapped in the middle, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in Syria, or whether it's in Gaza.
Obviously, Iowa's 3rd congressional race is one of the most competitive House races in the country.
Yeah.
It was rated as a Republican toss-up by the Cook Political Report. I was curious how you are planning to reach independent voters.
So this is a really important part. I've got 750,000 amazing bosses here in Iowa, and I'm proud that Iowa is a fairly drawn district. It means that we get to work with both Republicans, Democrats, and independents to make sure their priorities are heard. I think the majority of people can agree that we've got about 80% of things or more that we can all work on together. And that's what we've tried to do during our first, 2 years in Congress. I think we've been really successful on that, but some of our best recommendations have come from people across the political spectrum. Affordable housing, taking care of nurses, training more truck drivers, expanding opportunities for, skilled trades right here in Iowa, expanding things like hard infrastructure to help rural communities, as well as the things we've done just today to help urban communities here in Des Moines fight addiction, move folks out of prison time into rehabilitation programs. It saves the taxpayer dollar, it helps communities grow. These are things that we've been not only proud to lead, but I think are reflective of that Iowa common sense. And so if we can continue more of that in Washington, D.C., I am very confident that we have the opportunity to win over. Now, we're not taking anything for granted on this. We recognize that, out-of-state actors have spent a ton on all these commercial ads you're probably seeing as this is aired. But the reality is we put in dedicated shoe leather to really talk to Iowans, be a champion for their voice on this. I think that's what's going to get us over the finish line at the end.